welcome everyone. Glad to see you all here. Today we're going to be doing a little live coding adventure. So we're going to take a look at a new framework that we have called Hilla, which combines Spring Boot and React into this full stack framework that's optimized for productivity. And obviously, as we're all developers here, what better way of looking at how a tool works than actually taking it out hands-on. So with that, let's get started. My name is Marcus. I've been working kind of in this intersection of Java and web for the past 20-ish years right now. So always been building my backends in Java, always been building my front ends in some kind of web technology, and it's been just fun to see both of these ecosystems evolve over time. And in general, I consider myself a curious learner. I like to tinker with things and play around with stuff. So there are a couple of additions to this, like we're going to do a ChatGPT integration. We're going to do a GraalVM image build just to kind of play around with some cool new stuff out there. I work as the VP of Developer Relations at Vaadin. So we are a company who helps Java developers build great web applications. Hilla is one of our frameworks. You might have used Vaadin Flow, the other framework, at some point. If you want to tweet at me or hit me up on any other social media, you can find me at Marcus Hellberg on pretty much anything. So GitHub, Twitter, Mastodon, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, whatever, all of them. Good. So we're going to try something here, and hopefully you have a phone or a computer or some sort of device with you. We're going to do a little live audience participation here. So I want to get to know you, everyone here in this room, just going to get a feel for who you are as developers, what kind of stuff you're doing. That's going to help me also focus in a little bit on what we're working with in the actual live coding stuff. So you can use the QR code, or you can go to the URL there and hit in the numbers there. If you're in, you can hit the like button there. I can see that a couple of people are in there. I'm going to keep the instructions up here for a while on a couple of the next slides, so you can continue to join here. So once I see most of the phones go down, I will go to the first question. So we have a little bit of polling here in the beginning, and you all will get to know each other a little bit better. So if you were to describe yourself as a developer, would you say that you're mostly a back-end developer? Would you say you're a full-stack developer, or perhaps a front-end developer? Now, this is always kind of interesting and very much depends on what conference you're at. So looks like we are back-end developer heavy. Not by much though. So just over half the people who have answered, 13 people, are saying that they are back-end developers as opposed to full-stack developers. Nobody here admits to being a front-end developer. No? One person? Hello? Good. Welcome. All are welcome here. All right, so let's continue on. In terms of languages that you work with, what are you familiar with? What are you using? Java, maybe? I think many of you might be. Kotlin, TypeScript, JavaScript, HTML, CSS. All right, so 15 out of 15 have done Java. That's good. We're in the right conference, clearly. And we got a whole bunch of delayed messages. So somewhere there's a blockage, but that got cleared up. Very good. All right, so we're seeing a lot of Java folks at a Java conference. That's great. And we have kind of a smattering of front-end frameworks and or front-end languages here, which is good. We're going to be working a little bit with those as well. Perfect. Then, backend. What are you using today? Are you using Spring Boot, Jakarta, Quarkus, Node, something entirely different? Probably PHP users. Okay. We're seeing a lot of Spring Boot users, seeing a much stronger Jakarta following here than in many user groups I've been to. That's awesome to see. A lot of Quarkus users as well. Interestingly, in a lot of I live in the US and I go to a lot of user groups there. It's interesting to see that Node tends to be right on the same level as Spring Boot. So that is clearly not the case in this audience right here. So that's good. We're going to be working with Spring Boot and Java here. All right. Then, in terms of front-end languages, if you are working with any front-end tools, obviously I understand everyone will not. But if you are you using React, Angular, Vue, Lit, Vaadin? What are you using? So let's see. Seems like Angular is off to a strong lead here, and obviously we're not expecting as many answers here as we have for the others, because not everyone is doing front-end development, but it seems like Angular is kind of up to a strong lead here, with React coming in second place. So I'll try to keep that in mind and explain some React concepts if there are some kind of confusing things there, which I know there will be if you haven't done React before. So I'll try to explain those and keep everyone on the same page. All right, thank you very much for that. I think we are now better acquainted with each other. We know who we have in the room. All right, so let me start with a story just to kind of set the stage for what we have done here with Hilla. So imagine you're building an application. The dark background here represents your backend, and the light is your front end here. So you are building a very trivial, simple application. You have a Java model, a person with a first name, last name, and an address. You have a REST endpoint for getting people, so that returns a JSON of all these people. And in your front end here, this is React code, so we're mapping over that list of people, and for each we're returning a list item that just concatenates the first name and the last name. Simple enough. Everything works. All is good. A few weeks later, Bob comes along. It's a Friday afternoon, and he's starting to get a little thirsty, so he's in a hurry to get his stuff done. And unfortunately for us, he has a different opinion about what he needs from this person. So he doesn't really feel like he wants to mess around with first names and last names. So he goes ahead and changes the model here to only have a name. But because we're using REST here, that's just returning JSON. There's really no way for Bob to know what other parts of the front end might be using that besides the stuff that he fixed. So he fixes his code, gets it running, obviously pushes to production because it's Friday, why not? Probably a good idea. Goes out for a couple of beers, and sure enough, when he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he has a lot of angry calls from his boss because everything is broken now. So wouldn't it be nice if Bob got these red squiggly lines in our code telling us that, hey, by the way, you're about to break somebody else's code? And I think as Java developers, this is something that we are sort of very used to a point where we don't necessarily even think about it. Having this type safety network around us helping us do good choices when we're developing. So if we're refactoring code or we're exploring APIs, we have a lot of information that we can pull from. It can tell us if we're about to break code somewhere else. It can usually help us even fix that. It also makes it really easy for us to explore APIs. We don't have to open up a different browser window and read API documentations and try to figure out which format to format a URL, and does it take query parameters or maybe a body of a JSON. Like, we don't have to deal with that. We just kind of use the programmatic API, and that helps us be productive. So that was kind of the thought we have in our head when we started building this. So what Hilla is essentially is a Spring Boot backend, a React front end, a little bit of magic, and that's what Hilla is essentially. So what we're trying to do is make it easy to build actual meaningful applications. So we're really focusing on these more data-heavy applications that might be complex data models, lots of grids, lots of forms, lots of kind of real-life stuff. The way we make this more productive for you is that, first of all, we have a large library of all the kind of UI components, all the building blocks you need when you're building an application. So anything from very simple things like buttons and text fields all the way up to data grids and charts and editors and menu bars, and everything that you need basically is available there. So you don't have to kind of spend time building the building blocks before you start building the actual application. The other thing is that we take care of Java to TypeScript type generation. So the idea is that you are able to expose an endpoint in Java, and you will get a TypeScript method with the exact same signature, returning objects of that exact same signature, meaning that you will have kind of your backend and front end in sync always. And this can make a lot of things easy. So as we get to the actual live coding part here, you're going to actually see what that means in reality. And with that, I think we actually need to hop over to the live coding part, because we've done a lot of talking and not a lot of coding so far. So let's hop on over here. And before I start doing anything, I'm going to make sure that everyone in the back is able to see the code. Thumbs up, down. Let's say anyone who doesn't see the code well, raise your hand. Okay, so I'll take your word for it. Okay, so we have a Hilla application here. If you don't see the sidebar here, it's a Spring Boot project. I'm using Maven here. We also support Gradle. I'm using Spring Boot 3.1. I have in here a Hilla bomb, which then I use to pull in the Hilla dependency here. So that's kind of a Spring Boot project with Hilla added onto it. The project structure looks like this. So we have our classic source main Java folder here, which includes the Spring Boot application. I can run the application through here. And what that's going to do is it's going to start not only our backend, but also our front end. The front end lives in the front end folder here, and it's a React application. Right here, I have one view that we're going to start building. This is a view called chat view, and that's going to give us a little clue to what we're building today. So we're going to build a simple chat application because that's going to be a good way for us to just play around with some of the concepts and see how all of this fits together. Like I said, we have unified build tooling, meaning that whenever I change anything in the front end or the back end, it's going to automatically reload my browser so I can kind of see what I'm building as I'm building it, and that's nice. All right, so let's start building our application by defining an endpoint, and this is kind of what is unique to Hilla. So we're going to create a new class that I call my chat endpoint. And this is a Java class that's annotated with an endpoint annotation. That's what tells Hilla that this is a endpoint. And I'm going to close the sidebar so we get a little bit more room here. I'm going to also say anonymous allowed because I'm not going to start setting up Spring security here. But if you were building a real-life application, you would probably want to use some sort of security here. All right, so in our endpoint, we need some sort of model to deal with our messages that we're going to be passing back and forth. So I'm going to just define a record here called message. And my message record will have three things. So it will have a string for the user name. It will have a string for the text that we send. And then we'll have a instant for the time that it was sent, like this. Straightforward enough. All right. So I'm going to enable GitHub Copilot here to get some test data, and I'm going to create a new method called public list. So we're returning a list of these messages, and we're going to call this get messages. And let's see if we can get some messages created for us. We can. Perfect. All right, so we now have one API here that returns a list of messages to us. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to build a project. So in my build menu, I do build project. And what that's going to do is here in the front end folder, there's this generated source folder. And let me see here. Reload. All right, so there we go. It's a little early here. So what we'll see here is that we have some generated stuff. We have a generated endpoint that matches what we have. And then we have a generated TypeScript type that matches our message. So what that allows me to do is I can go into my chat view here and I can call the backend through an RPC, very similar to as I was calling the Java method directly. Now, for those who are not familiar with React, let's do just a very quick brief introduction to how a React component works. So a React component is a JavaScript function that returns a snippet of HTML, the template. The template depends on a state. So in our case, we're going to define a state that is the messages. And whenever those messages change, then React will re-render this template. The way you define state in React is using a useState hook. So it's going to look like this. We have messages and set messages. And we're going to get those by calling useState. useState will return these two values in an array, and the syntax here is just me pulling those two values out of an array into separate variables. Because we are using TypeScript here, I can say that this will be a message array type, which will help me as I'm working with this. And I want to initialize it with an empty array just to get started. Okay, so we have those. And what I want to do then is I want to call the backend. The way I call a backend in this functional React land is by defining a side effect to my otherwise side effectless functional component. We can do that by using the use effect hook. This takes in two things: the thing we want to call, and then an array of dependencies. So whenever anything in this array changes, we want to call this again. Now in our case, we only want to call it once to kind of get the initial set of data. But in a, say you're doing an edit screen, you would probably want to depend on the ID, and whenever the ID changes, you would call the server to get information about the new thing that you're editing. All right, so within this use effect hook, we're going to call the server, and we're going to call the server by getting our chat endpoint. We're going to press dot, and it's going to tell us what methods we have on our backend. We have a get messages function, and this will then return our stuff. So this is a asynchronous call, meaning that it will not block the UI. So we need to either define a then on it, or we need to await it. In this case, the cleanest way is to just pass the setter for messages straight there. So whenever the server call finishes, it's going to populate the state here. All right, so far we've populated the state, but we haven't used it anywhere. So just for us to see that this actually works, let's create an unordered list here, and then we're going to take those messages and we're going to map over them. So for each message M, we want to return something, and we can return a list item here where we can take M dot, and then we can see that it's offering us autocomplete here with all the properties in that object because it is typed. So we're going to say that m.username says text, and React wants to have a key whenever we loop over things so it can stay efficient. So we can use the message timestamp for that unique key like that. All right, so if things went well, let's boost that up a little bit. You should see now that we have these messages displayed here. Now, using an unordered list is not super impressive, I know. And that's where our components come in. So I mentioned that we have this big library of UI components that we can use, and that's what we're going to do to make this application a little bit quicker to build. So instead of kind of building with these basic HTML building blocks, I'm going to use two of our methods here. So I'm going to use a message list for displaying all the messages, and I'm going to use a message input for capturing input. So saving that, we can see that we get the message input here, and because we don't have any messages, the message list is of undefined size. It's not really taking up any space here. What I want to happen is to have the message input all the way here at the bottom. I'm using some of our utility CSS classes here, so if you've ever heard of or used Tailwind, you probably know how these work. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to give this a class name of flexGrow, which will tell the flexbox, CSS flexbox, that I want that element to really take up all the space that's available in the layout for it. Then we're going to say items is equal to our messages, like that. They're going to show up here, all nicely rendered. All right, so we're off to a very good start here. We have kind of the basic UI building blocks of what we might need for a chat application. Now the problem is our API is not ideal. We only have an API for fetching a fixed list of messages. What then? Like, what happens when somebody sends a message? Do we have to like keep asking the server to resend all the messages? That's not super ideal. So let's go back into our endpoint and refactor this a little bit. So I want to use some of the reactive types from Project Reactor here. We're going to create a sync, which is a programmatic way for us to create essentially a flux of values. So essentially, we want to have one place to post values to, and then everyone can subscribe to that. So let's go ahead and refactor our backend. We're going to remove what we had there, and we're going to create this new sync. So we're going to have a sync of many, which means we're returning many messages over time. We can call this our message sync, and that's something that we can get from using the builder here. So syncs.many.multicast, direct best effort. So we're just going to do our best. We're not going to deal with back pressure issues or lost messages or anything else. Just do our best. It's probably going to be fine. All right. I forgot to mention, if you have your app open and you have any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in person like this, feel free to use the app to type in their questions, and they're going to show up towards the end here. Yes, you're skipping ahead a little bit, but we'll get there. So if everything goes well and nothing blows up, then that's exactly what's going to happen. All right, so we have that. I'm going to re-enable my little code helper here so we don't have to type as much. So we have the infrastructure in place. We have one place where we can publish stuff, and then we have one single thing that everyone can subscribe to, so they're getting the same data. So let's do a method that returns a flux of messages, and let's call this get, or let's say join chat. Sounds good. All right, so then we have that, and yeah, that seems exactly like what I want. Thank you, Copilot. So the other part of it is we want to have a send message method. So that takes in the username, who's sending it, what text are they sending. It tries to emit a new message record with that information time-stamped for right now. And if we build this right now, what we are hoping to happen is what Bob was hoping would happen in our story earlier. So we get this red squiggly line saying like, uh-oh, you broke something. So it alerts us to actually have to do something here. So our API changed, we need to deal with that. Fair enough. Let's do control space to see what we have here. So we see we have our two new methods here. We're going to call join chat, say on next. So whatever we get a new message, we want to do something. And what we want to do is we want to set the messages again. So we're going to call set messages, but we're going to use this other way. So we're going to take the previous state, we're going to expand that into a new array, and then we're going to append that new message. So if you're not familiar with JavaScript, what we're doing is we're creating a new array with all the items from the previous array with that new message appended. The reason we're doing this is that React's change detection only looks at the actual reference to the array, not the content. So if we just push a new thing onto the same reference, it's not going to notice anything changes. So it essentially immutable data structure, so you need to do a new version. All right, so that looks okay. So let's see that we didn't break anything. No, it still runs. Okay, so next thing we want to do then is we want to push new messages onto this message sync. So for that, I'm going to add a onSubmit listener here, and we get a message whenever that gets submitted. I'm going to call send. I'll do just a local method here called send, and I'm going to take the value from that send event, and I'm going to, let's see here, I'm going to create a new function for us here. So we're going to have a local function here called send, and what we're going to do here, we're going to call a chat endpoint. We're going to say send message. Of course, right now, we don't have a way of capturing the username yet. We're going to get to that in just a second, but for now, I will type in my own name here, and we're going to pass in the text like that. We're going to save that, and hopefully, if things went well, we can say hello, and that shows up here. So what happened is that that message went to the server, got emitted to the sync, which then we are able to subscribe to through the Flux. Okay, so now to your question, can we actually have multiple people? Obviously, it's fun to talk to ourselves. We can always agree with our own brilliance, but I mean, in reality, it's probably fun to talk with other people. And sure enough, like the more people join the same Flux, they all submit to the same source of information. They are all going to get that same. Yeah, of course, like that just requires you to do a little bit more kind of deal with the data model so that it actually supports that, but there's nothing in like the actual product that would prevent you from doing that. Okay, so yeah, we had a problem here. We cannot set the username yet, so let's use some of our other components to just take a fix that. So for that, I'm going to define two new pieces of state. I'm going to have one for capturing the actual like input that somebody types, and then for one for the username itself. So again, we're going to use the exact same pattern here. We're going to have a input and set input array here, and that will use state starting with an empty string, and then we'll have exactly the same, except we're going to call this username and set username, also starting with an empty string. So that means I don't have to hard code my name here. I can say username, And then to do one of my favorite things in TypeScript, which is to say if not username, so that'll take care of if it's null, empty, undefined, something else that's sort of null-ish, and drop me into this other branch here. So here I can actually, I'm going to just return a different snippet of HTML. And here I'm going to attempt to sort or kind of solve one of the harder things in web development. So we're going to try to center a div. And we're going to use those utility classes. So we're going to create a flexbox. And we're going to, well, let's start with that. And we're going to set the height to full. We're going to align. We're going to say items center and justify, let's say justify center. All right, so essentially center things in both X and Y axis. And then we'll have another div, which will just be a flexbox with a small gap between items like that. Here we're going to use two of our components. We're going to use the text field, and we're going to use the button like that, say join, and that should show up here. We can say the button should have a theme of primary, make it a little bit more apparent. Maybe we say our text field, let's say placeholder is equal to username, like that. Very good. All right, so what I want to do with the text field now is turn this into a bound component. So I want the value to always reflect this state. So I'm going to say that the value is equal to the input, and, well, not that input, that one. All right, and then I will say that on change, whenever that changes, I'm going to take the event and I'm going to set the input value to be the event target, so the text field's value like that. So that way, anytime the state changes, so if I change the default value of input, that's going to be bound here. And whenever I type something into it, it's going to update this value. What that allows me to do then is take my button here and define a click listener on it. So we can say on click, we want to do something. So let's say that we want to join, and we can go ahead and create this function. Join will be fairly straightforward. So we're going to set the username to whatever the input value is at that stupid thing. Input, there we go. And then we can reset the input, so we can set the input to be the same, or be an empty string essentially. All right, so let's see what we have here. Fix that, no. All right, there we go. So now hopefully if I type in my name here and click join, that drops me through the if statement here, because username is now set, and it's going to drop me to this other snippet here. So I can now hopefully open up another window here, have Bob join our chat, and he can say hello, and that should show up there, and I can say hi there. So that way now we have a chat with kind of multiple people, and they don't have to be all called Marcus, which is very convenient because everyone's not named Marcus. All right, very good. The next thing I want to do is looking at composing different reactive things. So we have this one reactive thing right now, which is our backend here. And I want to hook up another thing. So I want to call an external API to fetch some more data. And then when that data comes back, I want to push that into the same sink so that that gets pushed out to people. For that, I'm going to use ChatGPT. You might have heard of it if you've been online in the recent weeks. The way that works is I've created a ChatGPT service, and that uses a ChatGPT client, which is a Spring web client that calls the OpenAI API. It passes in my OpenAI key, and then it takes that response and serializes it or deserializes it into this ChatGPT response class that I'm using then to actually pull out the information from. That's all implementation details. In our case, we're just interested in actually using this service. So for that, let's auto wire in this thing here. So let's say final ChatGPT service. We'll call this our ChatGPT service, and then we're going to say add constructor parameter. That creates a constructor that takes that in, and Spring is going to see that, and it's going to inject that service for us. So that's very convenient. So what we can do then is we can go into our send message here, and right now we're just emitting the first message, which is fine. What I want to do then is I want to take my ChatGPT service and I get the answer for that same text that was sent, and then I'm going to subscribe to it. So whenever the answer comes in, now I can do something with it. Right, and what I want to do with it is do the message sync, try to emit a new message where the username is, I don't know, bot, and bot will say answer, and we can take the timestamp just from instant.now, like that. All right, let's see what is not compiling. All right, everything looks okay, I guess. So let's go ahead and build this. So again, this should refresh my browser here shortly, and I should be able to log in. So I'm going to log in, put join, and say hello there. And if the internet works, we should get a answer from ChatGPT. And you notice that took a little while. We weren't blocking anything on the back end or the front end. It just kind of, whenever that happened to work, it came back and we got. What's that? So can we return streams? Yeah, I have a, yeah. I can, I have another example I can show you later on that deals with streams. Right now we're just dealing with plain things. All right, so let's see. Tell me a developer joke. Aw. Haha, it's even a C# joke. That's awesome. You're welcome. All right, so what we've done, I love the delayed kind of pained laugh. It's always a sign of a good pun. All right, so what we've done then is we've built a full stack application that's using React on the front end. It's using Spring Boot on the back end. We've used Hilla to auto-generate those types for us. It's allowed us to be kind of productive as we're building stuff. We can explore the APIs through just auto-completion. We are able to kind of get compile time errors if we change something in the back end that needs to kind of get fixed in the front end. So the final thing I wanted to do here is take this application that we just built and just compile it to a native GraalVM image, just because why not? So for that, we need to go and do a little workaround, because there's a bug in the latest Spring Boot, which is if you have Spring Boot DevTools on your class path, it fails to work. So if you're trying to use it and it doesn't work, that's a good thing to do. All right, so when we have that done, what we can do, I'm hopefully in the same directory here, you can do a Maven build, and in this case I'm going to do the native profile that's going to tell Spring Boot that we want to build a native application. I am passing the production profile because I want to tell Hilla to build a production optimized bundle, turn off all the debug logging and minimize all the assets and do bundle splitting and all the fancy stuff. So if I hit enter here, this is going to take a little while, because what's happening is the Spring starts up an AOT compilation step where it actually runs the application. Then it looks around and sees like, what are we using? What do we actually need to put into that native binary? What don't we need to have in there? The only thing I've needed to change in my application from just having a plain kind of Spring Boot application is this one annotation here. So in this case, I know that the web client is going to use reflection for deserializing this response here. So I just added this annotation saying register reflection for binding. That's going to let it know that that's something that it needs to include in the native binary. All right, so I'm going to wait for this to happen. This takes anywhere from a minute and a half to maybe 2 minutes, depending on your computer and everything else. So this is definitely not something you want to do like during development time, but it can be really kind of handy when you are doing a build for production. If you are running the application somewhere where you want it to start quickly, if you want it to use the bare minimum amount of memory possible for a Java based application. So we're at step 6 out of 7 here. We're nearing the end, and hopefully this works. Have a Anticipatory sip of water. Almost. Creating image. So what I'm doing for one of my actual production Hilla applications is I'm doing this essentially in a Docker file and then putting that native image that I've built onto a very lightweight container that doesn't need to have Java or anything else on it. So it uses a bare amount of memory and just starts up very quickly. So now that we have the native binary built, it's going to be in our target folder. And it's going to be, all right, let's see, target, and it's going to be called Hilla React Chat. And all right, let's redo that because it was a little quick. So in case you blinked, this application started in 0.07 seconds, and hopefully it should not work any different. So we should still be able to use it the same way as before. So I should be able to put in my name here. I should be able to tell me another developer joke. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Only science. Perfect. All right, so that's a appropriately bad joke to end the live coding section on. We made it through. Thank you all. All right, so if you want to play around with the exact application that we just built, you will be able to find it on my GitHub. So go to Marcus Hellberg /Hilla React Chat. You can use the QR code if you are more the point and click type of guy. And once I see the phones go away, we can go on to the next section here. All right. So there are a couple of kind of core ideas that went into like why we built Hilla. And one is really we wanted to make it easy to also build these complex business applications. A lot of frameworks tend to optimize for a super easy hello world, but then as the application complexity becomes bigger, then the application complexity becomes bigger. So we really try to give you all those building blocks you need to build meaningful applications just straight out of the box. We also have an opinion on having this full stack development environment where you have your front end and your back end code in this BFF kind of setup where you have the back end, the topmost back end layer and your front end layer. And that's because we think that kind of having a collaborative team where you have everyone who needs to build a function co-located speaking with each other is super efficient, because then you don't have the issue where a backend team built an API 2 weeks ago. You start building the front end, you notice that the API didn't do exactly what you wanted. You start actually calling 3 different APIs in the front end and trying to parse together something with duct tape. It's really great if you can have people speaking with each other with low latency and just getting stuff done. We also believe in just having like very specific communication for the views where we're only sending over the bare minimum that's needed for that. We're not exposing a whole bunch of stuff. We can very efficiently pull together, aggregate data, filter data stuff on the back end, and then we can just send over what's actually needed there. And the reason why we put all of these things together and why we support this as a one full stack framework is that we want people to be able to focus their development time on building end user functionality, not kind of piecing together all the pieces of React and Spring Boot and trying to kind of keep this whole kind of thing together. The joke is obviously like with React projects, like after a while you're like spending 80% of your development time just kind of trying to keep the app afloat as opposed to like adding new functionality to it. So we are hoping that we can take off some of that burden, make sure that whenever we update stuff, we update the components, we update every piece of the stack that works together so that you have less of that stuff that you need to deal with. All right, so with that, we have gotten to the questions. We have a couple more minutes here, and we have about 20 minutes before the next people come in, so I think we have plenty of time here. All right, so first question that we have here, and again, feel free to ask through the application, and you can also ask just in person. Just put up your hand if that's how you want to do it. All right, so first question, is it possible to mix the use of Vaadin and another UI library like MUI Bootstrap? Sure is. So anything that works with React, or we also support lit element on the front end. If you kind of don't want to use React, you could even use that. But essentially, we haven't tried to like prevent anyone from doing their own decisions. So we come with one set of components that we think is pretty nice. It's very kind of customizable. We have some parameters that you can use to change the base colors and roundness and spacing and fonts like across all the components. But if you want to use something else, that's certainly something you can do quite easily. All right, let's see. So press enter to mark as answered. Very good. Was the TypeScript model automatically generated, or did you do this prior to the session? So that's automatically generated whenever I build a project. So in IntelliJ, I have to actually physically hit a button to do the compilation. In VS Code, Eclipse, other IDEs that automatically compile as you go along, that would just happen automatically. So nothing I did prior to this. So, and we actually saw that when we changed the API signature, you could see it kind of all of a sudden something that worked a minute ago stopped working. Yes, so the generation is kind of created, or that's done by the Maven plugin or Gradle plugin if you're using that. So whenever it kind of, I don't remember which specific goal it's hooked onto, but essentially when you build the Java code, it's going to look at that and kind of regenerate the types based on that. All right, is there a plan to support Vue.js in combination with Hilla? I don't know if there's an official plan. We've gotten several questions. I have on my GitHub an example of how to do that. So we're using very standard tooling here. We're using Vite on the front end. So if you wanted to use Vue instead of React, you would go into the Vite config, you would change the React plugin to Vue plugin, and you would plop in your like Vue starter project in the front end folder, and that's pretty much it. Or then you check out my my demo on GitHub. So hopefully, I think in terms of like front end framework priorities, we've heard probably a little bit more Angular. So probably like the next potential suspect would probably be Angular and then Vue, but that's speculation right now. Right now, we want to make sure that the kind of React experience is really top notch before we start spreading ourselves too thin. All right, good questions. What about Kotlin.js? Is there supported, or will it be supported? I've got to be honest, I haven't tried Kotlin.js. Seems like it should be doable. So if you're like thinking like instead of TypeScript on the front end, is that what you're thinking? Yeah. I don't know. It sounds like a really interesting thing to hack on. I can't answer that right now, unfortunately. All right, let's see. Yeah, same question. Angular, not right now. You could do it like manually, but we're hoping to do that at some point. So with these kind of other frameworks, there's not a whole lot of stuff we need to do, but we like with Angular, the expectation of how to actually call a server is a little bit different from what it is in React. So in Angular, you would expect to get like an observable RxJS thing back instead of getting a promise. So we probably want to make sure that the kind of types are what you would expect. Could you show or tell how to create Hilla project in an IDE like IntelliJ who has Spring Boot generator? Yes. So hopefully Hilla will be added to Start Spring IO this week. We just finished kind of all the things that were required to it, so should be there. Up until then, you can use the Hilla CLI, so I'll give it a link here shortly, but essentially it's a CLI that you can run to generate a new project with Spring Boot and Hilla. Angular's, yeah. I see a pattern here, yeah. All right, is it possible to split front-end development and back-end development in order to make development team independent? It probably would be, but like as I kind of went through our principles, that's not what we're optimizing for right now. So right now we're optimizing for kind of these functional teams where you have everyone involved in building a feature working on the same team. Depending on what sort of feedback we hear from people, if like people are coming chasing us with pitchforks and torches and stuff and say that they need this, we'll reconsider, but for now we're gonna focus on what we have here. We are probably like before then going to look at like separating the actual like front end assets from the back end assets, so you could kind of deploy the front end stuff to CDN and have the back end separately from that. But for now, that's all just a single deployment. All right, so we're gonna try to wrap up here just so we have enough time for anyone to come up here and speak as well. If you want to check out Hilla at all, you can go to hilla.dev. You can come to our booth right outside here, and we have demo machines. We can show stuff to you. We have swag there. We have socks. We'll have t-shirts tomorrow, so you can come there and get some stuff. And if you feel like you want to reach out to me later on, you can find me at Marcus Hellberg on most of the things. So with that, I want to thank you all for making the time to come here and talk, listen to my talk. Thank you so much, and yeah.